And we're live. Let's do this. What's up, guys? Welcome to the 4th episode of the 2nd season of the A.live podcast. I have a special guest with me today. He's actually my sponsor and the 12-step program that we participate in. I'm happy to have you here. Kris, thanks for doing this, man. How you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of controversy with people meeting in person now, and I know it's something you wanted to kind of touch on. You know, we have our Purell here at the at our side, so if we need to sanitize our hands, we're good to go.
I brought my own with me. I was prepared.
Yeah. So that's cool, man. Yeah, dude. So we just read the self-acceptance pamphlet, and it was talking a lot about accepting yourself, really, and coming to a place where you can have peace about who you are as a person. And like, that's something I've been touching a lot on with other guests on the podcast this season about. I feel like I'm in an identity journey right now with myself, and just coming to a deeper level of that acceptance so I can find peace within me and move on in my journey of recovery without masking feelings, because there's other ways to mask feelings other than drugs, right? So this is something that I'm trying to learn and practice, and I'm glad we picked this IP out. But I wanted to just hop right into it and see like if you're willing to share your story and how you came into recovery.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And there's a lot, and throughout it, there's going to be a lot of self-acceptance issues, because it's the biggest thing that I still struggle with in my recovery is self-acceptance, and a lot of problems that I deal with and character defects and different things all boil down to fear and a lack of self-acceptance, but I'm grateful because like I'm in the process today, and like it's gotten so much better since I've been clean and since I've been working the steps and since I like actively engage in the recovery process, But yeah, I can jump right into like kind of my story. So just to kind of start at the beginning, I always share about, I come from a great background, man. Like I was raised in such a loving environment at home, and I'm so grateful for that, because there's a lot of people that weren't, I know a lot of people who had really rough upbringings and they struggle with that, and like that wasn't my story. I was raised in a family where like my parents were together, they loved each other, they treated each other with respect. I could tell that as a kid, you know what I mean? Like that was like tangible,
right? Something you were aware of. Yeah,
absolutely. And it taught me a lot of morals and values and all that kind of stuff. Some of my earliest memories are the same that I've heard other people share about, feeling less than, feeling out of place, feeling like, I didn't realize this until later on, but I felt like everybody else got this like manual on how to live life or how to be like a person. And like I missed that day of class or whatever it was when they handed that out. I just always felt insecure. And like, I don't know, maybe there are kids who just have that experience in general. I just know what my experience is, but like that's the way it was for me, and so like when I was small, I just kind of dealt with that. It was what it was. I got into stuff where like I got a lot of positive attention through school. I was did really well in school, did some sports stuff, which was okay. Got some attention through that. And I just kind of managed and was in this great household. You know what I mean? So like I was growing up, and I think it was around like 12 or 13 was the first time that I had an experience with a substance, with a drug, right? Okay. And I think it was alcohol, was the first one. And I don't remember specifically, but I think it was some kind of situation where like, somebody stole something out of their parents' liquor cabinet or whatever it was, and we drank. And I wasn't like, sometimes I hear people share about how like, oh, that was it, and then they were off to the races. Like that wasn't my experience. Like I think I caught a little buzz off it or whatever. I was like, oh, that's okay, but it wasn't a focal point after that, But I think like a year later was the first time that I experimented with like marijuana, like weed or whatever. And that was something I was a little bit more into. But even then, I didn't just all of a sudden start using drugs every day. It was this slow, progressive process of what I now recognize as the disease of addiction, that took place. And like, over time, it just became more and more frequent. I would go to parties or whatever it was. And what I found was that I liked being high, but really what I liked about it as a kid was that I didn't have all of those feelings, that lack of self-acceptance running through my head when I was around people. It just masked those things. It just covered those things up for me. And I felt like I could function the way that I should really be functioning. So that was really my draw to using drugs when I was younger, and then as time went on, it just became more and more. And when I was younger, I also started seeing people getting in trouble from using.
Okay.
And I decided like, that's not going to be me, you know? So I kind of developed this like dual identity where I showed up to school every day. I did a good job. I was like, you know, the accelerated classes, things like that. But then when I would leave school, I'd go hang out with the people that got high and did that.
Sure. So behind closed doors, you were somebody different. You were playing two roles. And you mentioned, well, let me backtrack.
Okay.
So let me ask you this. Do you think you were an addict before you picked up a drink or a drug?
I do, absolutely.
Okay,
I think I'm very the nature piece. That's just for me though, and I don't, you know, whatever anybody else thinks about that for themselves is totally cool with me. But I believe that I was born an addict,
sure,
and it just took a certain set of experiences to kind of express that in me.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, you kind of told my story in the beginning. You said you were like 12 or 13. It was probably, you know, someone's parents' liquor cabinet. And you know, you got drunk, whoop-de-doo, and then next thing you know, the weed came along and you enjoyed that more. And so that kind of relates to how my story started as well. So that's interesting. Anyway, continue, man.
Yeah, and I think you know, so we went through high school kind of doing that, like I said, showing up to school, but then using outside of it, trying to keep things totally separate, and was successful with that for a while, which just made me feel more in control of what was going on in my life because things were going the way that I wanted them to for the most part. You know, I think I used some different drugs. I think I used cocaine for the first time when I was 18, still in high school. And that was the first time that I had some people who I actually used with who like confronted me about that and were like, hey man, I heard that you were like doing coke at this party. Like that's a little beyond, like we're just trying to party and have fun. That's like a, you know, hard drug or whatever.
Were these people that you were maybe smoking pot with, drinking with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that was the thing. And I kind of I was just annoyed by it. But I think that could have been an early indication of like, I was taking things further and further as time went on.
Yeah.
I got out of high school. I got into University of Maryland College Park, and I moved down there. And that's when things just really took off for me. That's when I started using every day because I grew up in this like structured home where there were rules. And like if I wanted to stay out all night or do whatever, I had to lie to do what I wanted to do. I went to college and I didn't have any supervision anymore. You know, it was like there were no rules. I could do whatever I wanted to. And so that's when I really started using every day. The drugs changed, you know, how I used them changed. The frequency change. It's just, to me, when I look back, it's just this classic progression of addiction, you know?
Sure. Well, they say this disease is progressive, incurable, and fatal.
Right. Yeah. Fatal unless arrested. Yeah. I mean, I absolutely believe that to be the truth. 100%.
It's been in my experience that it's been very progressive. And I had some times along my journey where I was able to be abstinent for a point in time. Maybe not so much in recovery, had been introduced to recovery, but hadn't been working on myself, you know, just been abstinent of whatever it was. And found myself when I used again that I was right back to where I left off, like I had never stopped in the first place. There was no gradual incline of the progression. It was like picked up right where I left off. So,
sure. Yeah.
And I don't know if you've had a similar experience where you've been had some abstinence before you came into recovery. I
did a little bit, very small amount.
Okay.
So basically from the time I was 18 until I got clean when I was 25, a lot happened, and it's a lot to go into. And usually I don't share a lot about it, and not that I'm hiding anything, but it's just a lot of using and consequences, car accidents, a lot of things like that. I got arrested. There were times in that period of time, that like 7-year period of time, where I would have some kind of moment of clarity due to some kind of mishap in my life, something that felt like the end of the world, some kind of disaster. And I would say, what am I doing with myself? I need to clean myself up. You know, it was so short lived though. So I would stop using for a couple days, or I would only do such and such drug. I wasn't doing everything else or whatever it was. And generally what happened was that I would either forget the pain that I had been in only a few short days before that, or I would get so bored that I would just go back to using. So like in hindsight, I look at those times as proving to myself that like if I'm not working on my recovery, I will use again. You know, and that's just something that I believe so strongly in, and that I really try to emphasize with, especially guys that I sponsor, but anybody who I'm having the conversation with, is like, and I can just say this for me, but I've also seen it be the experience of a lot of other people. Like, I have to focus on my recovery. I have to make it my number one priority in my life, because if I stop doing that, if I stop going to the meetings I go to, working on step work, sponsoring people, doing all these things I do, if I cut all that out of my life, it's just a matter of time before I start using again, just like it always was in the past. You know,
so what do you think about the online meetings right now? Because you know, we're in a time where we can't really even there's just no meetings. We can't go to a meeting. And you mentioned, like, you know, these things that you have to do to stay in recovery. And that's been my experience too. Like, I go to meetings, I'm in service work. Well, now that kind of has been shifted to a different means of getting those things done. We're in meetings in our living rooms or in our bedrooms, or, you know, and it's just it's a different feeling, it's a different energy, it's a different vibe. And I guess it's just a matter of time before we see how it affects us, whether it makes things better because it's easier to get to a meeting. You know, I mean, I don't know. What is your take on it?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely an adjustment. I mean, I'm so grateful that we have the ability to have online meetings, right? And a lot of them are happening on the Zoom platform, right? And that platform isn't in any kind of association with any of the 12-step programs or anything like that. And there's a lot of mention of that. There's some other platforms that are being used as well. I've been going to them for the past 2 weeks. And I've been doing probably 3 or 4 meetings a week, which is pretty much what my normal meeting attendance is anyway. I'm trying to keep as much normalcy in my life as possible right now, right? And I think that they're great. I've had an awesome experience with it. You know, I had to get used to like all the functionality of the app itself or the program and all that kind of stuff. But then, you know, we're doing a couple meetings where we're keeping our exact same format from our in-person meeting. Again, just the normalcy of like what we always do, you know? So I think they're great, you know, because most of the meetings are shut down, almost all of them. Because to be honest, I saw last week a couple meetings in the area that I'm in and go to 12-step meetings in that were still open. You know?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And I think one of them is now going to Zoom, but it's just one of those things where, you know, in the state of Maryland, I mean, it's pretty much illegal now to meet with over 10 people. And what do you do if you hold an in-person meeting, even if you're practicing all the social distancing and everything you should, when the 11th person shows up to the door, well, we're going to tell them that they can't come in, you know? So the online meetings are just such a good tool right now, you know? Yeah.
My experience with the online meetings is like, I love it. I think it's a great thing. You know, I'm a very technical savvy person, so I like, you know, I got my webcam on top of my TV and my MacBook's plugged into my TV, so I'm like seeing it on a big screen. I can sit on my couch and chill and eat, you know, get some popcorn, make a cup of coffee, whatever. In that sense, it's comfortable for me. In the sense where it's not comfortable for me, and I've noticed, and I haven't talked about this with anyone yet, so it's a good opportunity to bring it up, especially since we read the self-acceptance pamphlet, is that I noticed, you know, when we're on these Zoom meetings, you know, there's several ways you can have it set up. You can have it set up where you can see everyone who's in the room at the same time, and you know, or you can see where it's on a bar on the side and maybe you can see like 5 people, or you can have it so you can just see your webcam or just the name of the person who's sharing. And I found for me, because I'm not at a point yet where I've come to accept myself fully, you know, so I'm very cautious, aware, I guess, of what I look like when I'm on the screen. So you may be sharing a Zoom meeting, but I know that my box is in the corner over here and I can look at myself and I'm like, man, like, you know, it's just, for me, almost, I guess I have to put it on the view where it doesn't show all the people on the side. It just shows the name of the person who's sharing. So it keeps it less distracting for me because I'm so super self-conscious of what I look like, or, you know, whatever it may be. And like, I realize that's not like a healthy place to be because it's distracting from the meeting, as well as like, it doesn't really matter, you know, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And like, that's just something I wanted to share about because maybe somebody else is having that same experience. And like, this is what I have to do to be able to pay attention to the meeting. I just have to like turn my camera off so I can't see myself. It's just a weird thing, you know?
Yeah, dude, I'm having that same experience. You know, I found myself doing the same thing. Yeah. And I've been doing, I got one of the accounts on the Zoom platform, and I've been helping out with hosting some meetings. So I'm kind of also just navigating all that stuff and learning out how to use everything. And I'm looking at myself and I'm like, oh, that looks, no, I got to change how I'm sitting or whatever it is. Yeah,
the lighting's
so
not good.
It's a self-obsession, man, you know, and that's one of the symptoms of the disease of addiction. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Triangle of self-obsession.
Yeah, like I said, I'm very much in that. I feel like I've made some progress in that, just in the process of staying in recovery. And like, and a lot of times I catch myself doing it and I can let it go quicker than in the past. Like I'm caught up in that self-obsession of what I look like or how I think I sound like or whatever it is. Yeah. And I can realize what's going on and let it go. Yeah. You know, and sometimes I can do that faster than others, but I'm grateful for that pause, man, that to be able to recognize something, pause, and then make a different decision with it. Yeah. You know, it's awesome.
Yeah. It's like the filter between your thoughts and the words.
Yes.
That's another thing too, that, you know, I have now with having my experience in recovery, and because I'm a very reactive person. I've been known to just react without thinking, and like I still do in a lot of ways, but there's times in my experience where I'm able to just like think before I react. And I have to remind myself constantly of that. Yep. You know, the other thing that I got it up in my head about is like, well, now that there's all these Zoom meetings, like the podcast is less effective. Like no one's going to tune in. You know, that's one of the things that like I was self-conscious about. And then I remember like, I'm not doing this podcast to get views. I'm doing this podcast for my recovery. You know, it's as self-centered as this may sound, like the meeting comes to me, and it's a nice benefit of having the podcast is like, and I know it's not a 12-step meeting that we're in, but it's just another two addicts in one room sharing their experience with each other. And like that helps me.
Yeah.
And it allows me to have a deeper connection with the people in my life, you know, and get to know each other without the distractions of everyday life surrounding us. Sure. We have different distractions in here because we have computer with, you know, so, and all that stuff. But that was one thing that, you know, discouraged me a little this in the past 2 weeks since these Zoom meetings started. I was like, oh, well, there goes season 2 of the A.live podcast. Like, that's it. No one's going to tune in because, you know, they have these Zoom meetings and they're tired of doing the online meetings or whatever it may be. Like, my disease is talking to me. You know what I mean?
Because I'm sitting here thinking the opposite. Okay. I think that this podcast becomes even more effective and relevant. It was already relevant, but to possibly everybody, but especially people in the recovery community. But I think it's even more relevant because people are going to this type of media more and more to engage in their recovery, you know? So that's true. So I'm thinking you might get the most views on this today that you have based on the time that we're living in and what's going on right now, you know?
That's true. We'll see.
Yeah.
More will be revealed.
Cool.
So, but yeah, man, I know we started the podcast and you were sharing your story. So I want to get back to that because I know that's not the end, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we were talking about just, you know, times that I had some abstinence where I just wasn't using drugs. They were very short-lived after some brief moments of clarity that I had when I would, you know, find myself in a troubled spot when I was using. And, you know, that went on. And what happened for me was that I was 25, I was working, and I was getting in all these car accidents from nodding out behind the wheel. I ended up getting into opiates. I was eventually an IV heroin user for the last couple of years that I was using. So a lot of car accidents. Luckily, no one got seriously injured, you know, which I'm so grateful for because it could have very well went that way, you know. And I had this bigger moment of clarity that happened. I was working. I was out in my car. I had just went and copped. I got high and I was driving and I got in another car accident. I just got my car out of the shop, but it was just like one accident after another. Yeah. And I didn't like get in an accident with somebody else's car, but I was driving down the road. I nodded out. I swerved and I hit this like, it was a crosswalk that had like an elevated median in the middle. Okay. And it had poles on it. So I went through the poles. It tore up the underside of my car. So I pulled over, got out of the car, I was frustrated, picking up these pieces of my car that fell off from underneath. And I look around and I was outside of a school, right? So like it was not the time of day for it, but a different time of day. There could have been a crowd of kids at this crosswalk, and I would have plowed right through them because I would have nodded out either way. That was not going to have an effect on the events of what happened. So, and I don't know how many times like that I've been in a similar situation, but for some reason I thought about it that time, and this thought came through my head that had never come through my head before, which was, Kris, if you don't change something and do something different, it's always going to be this way. And eventually you are going to kill someone or you're going to kill yourself, and this was just this message that came through in my head. And it opened my eyes up a lot, man. And there was this, I think it softened me up. And there was this desperation that came from that thought, because I believed it to be 100% the truth. I wish I could say that I didn't use after that. That's not true. I did use for a couple days. It was pretty short though.
Sure.
And eventually what happened was I was living in my parents' house at the time. My car from the accident was messed up. I was trying to hide it at the house. I was angling my car a certain way out front so they wouldn't see what was going on. That worked for a couple days or whatever. And then my mom saw it, right? She pulled me up on it. And usually it would be lie, some kind of manipulation. I'm going to get my way out of this, whatever. I broke down and just started crying, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I remember my mom saying to me, so it makes me emotional every time I think about it.
Sure.
My mom was like, I love you, but I don't love whoever this is that you've become.
Yeah, man.
And it was powerful, and so what I was willing to do was accept a little bit of help, right? And I had been arrested before. I was on probation. I had done outpatient stuff. I was on maintenance for a long time.
Same here.
And look, this is the way that I am with maintenance, right? Okay. I go to a certain 12-step fellowship. I really try to follow what they have outlined for their program, right? Mm-hmm. But I also recognize that there's a lot of other paths of recovery out there, right? So I just know what my experience is and what works for me. Maintenance does not work for me or the program that I'm in, the 12-step program, but I try to be respectful of where anyone is in their journey or what they choose their recovery path to be, because there's a lot of different things out there, Okay. So I tried maintenance for a long time, didn't work for me. And I was on maintenance at that time even, actually. And so what happened was I had never been to an inpatient program before. So they suggested that, and I was willing to do that, I wasn't super excited about it, but I was willing to do it. They found a place for me to go. I went there, and when I walked in, they gave me a 12-step recovery book, right? And I knew nothing about 12-step recovery, right? Like through the probation officer, the doctor that prescribed me Suboxone, all these places, no one talked to me that I can remember about going to a meeting, or anything about 12-step recovery. So they gave me this book. I was in this treatment center. They brought H&I meetings in, right? So the meetings came in from a couple different programs. I kind of focused on one that I felt like was the one for me. Went to those meetings, read the book, and it wasn't an instant thing where I was like, wow, this is awesome. This is what I want to do, but it gave me a little bit of hope. And like, I had no hope at all that I was ever going to be able to stop using drugs. It had been so long. Like I used to work, so I worked in some restaurants and stuff when I was using, and I used to work long hours, sometimes 60, 70, 75 hours a week. I worked an 80-hour week one time, and some people do that, working 2 jobs and all that. But so I was not afraid of working, but I was always high when I was working. So when I was getting clean, I was terrified of even like a 40-hour week job. Like, how does anybody do that with being clean? It was just so far from what my experience was. Absolutely. And so I stayed in that place for a while, got out of there, started going to meetings right after I got out of that treatment facility, did a 90 meetings in my first 90 days. And then just just got involved with the whole recovery process, 12-step recovery process at that point. Got a home group, got a sponsor, got a network of people who were clean, who were really involved in the program that I'm in. Started working on a relationship with a higher power, started doing steps, got involved with service, just the whole thing. I was so wide open when I first got in because I was just so desperate for this new way of life that I was willing to take a lot of the suggestions that I got.
Yeah, and that's so important, especially it's like, it sounds like it was like a pivotal point in your recovery. Well, because you had an open mind at that point, and that it's still important to have an open mind every day in this process. But at that point, if you would have been closed minded, there would have been little to no chance to be in this process. Still, is what I know for myself. I mean, because you said a lot of ththings in there that I just could relate to, from the car accidents to working 40 hours a week without being high. All that fear you had, the Suboxone, you were on the maintenance program. It's almost like you're telling my story right now. And that's the funny thing about this program, man. And like, look, Kris, I think I met you like 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't know if you remember, but it was at Capricna. I think, standing there with Brian, and we were setting up for our show that we were going to do at the convention.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you and Shelby came up, and I think you were talking about something with the traditions, or maybe not. And
no, I was. I remember now.
Yeah, and it was just like, at that moment, I never thought, like, A, that I would be living in Maryland, B, that you would be my sponsor. At that point in time, I had no idea who you were, and here we sit several years later, and it's like, it's a good reminder to me why I picked you as a sponsor, because I see how you are so involved in the process. And like I could sing your praises right now, and that's not what we're here to do. This is an opportunity for us to get to know each other better. And it's just like, I never realized, because I never really heard your story, right? Okay. I came to your anniversary this past year. I think I showed up right when you started to share, because I know your home group has like a little different format from other home groups I've been to. Right. I can't remember what that was, but I showed up right when you were starting to share, and I don't remember you sharing a whole lot of your story.
Right.
I think you shared a lot about what was going on in your life during that point in time. I don't exactly remember, but like, I didn't realize how close our stories and just the feelings that we experience in addiction and recovery that are so relatable for each addict. And I think that's important, that for the newcomer to hear those things that they can relate to. And then see another addict that has 7 years clean like yourself and make it so relatable. I'm on Reddit, and that's just like it's another social media platform, and I'm in one of the groups. It's addiction Reddit, and I'm reading like the experience that people are having right now with this virus. And this particular story I read yesterday about this guy who's he's done, his girlfriend's gonna leave him. He was just talking about all these problems he has right now.
Yeah.
And my reply to his post was like, hey, I was right where you were 2 years ago. The circumstances may have been a little bit different, but I remember, man, being done.
Yeah.
I was like, you need to take this and turn your life around. And because like, if an addict like me can do it, so can you. And like, I hope that I encourage the guy, I hope that he like made it till today. I hope he didn't take his life, or, whatever. Like, use again, Yeah. I hope that he took some information that not only me but other people in the Reddit thread were like encouraging him to do. So, but you're not ready unless you're ready. And I was talking to my girlfriend about this within the past 2 days, about how, like, when I was ready to go to treatment, I was ready. And if there wasn't a bed open up like for another 2 days, forget about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's time. Like, when I'm ready and there's a bed open, I better fucking hightail my ass to rehab.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And rehab's not everyone's story. Some people get clean in the 12 in the rooms, so the 12 steps, or the 12-step program, I should say.
Right.
For anonymity purposes. But it's just I'm so grateful, man. I'm so grateful to have you in my life, really, because I was at a point in almost 2 years clean, feeling lost again, like sponsorless, little to no direction of where I'm gonna go with my recovery at this point. I needed that guidance from somebody, and even though if it was like it's pretty, for lack of a better like term, our relationship is still pretty new, even though we met 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know what year it was. I think I have the Capricna magnet. It's right over there. I want to look after the podcast. But
it might have been 2015, because that's when I was involved with that convention. Like, I was on programming with that, so I think I was there almost like behind the scenes a little bit more.
Yeah,
so, but yeah,
I think that I'm just grateful, man. I just wanted to express my gratitude for you. And
awesome.
We were talking also about, my girlfriend and I, we were talking about, she keeps asking me and holding me accountable, when are you going to start your third step? When are you going to start your third step? And she asked me this morning again, and I was like, I don't know, like, I guess this week, because I wanted to get her off my back about it, and she's probably upstairs laughing, watching this right now. But it's nothing to joke about, man. Like, if I don't move forward in my process, I'm going to stay where I am. And like I disclosed earlier, like, I'm not fully there, man. Like, I haven't accepted myself, in recovery. I haven't accepted, there's things about myself that I don't like. And I'm sure there's going to be that moving forward in the step work too. But like, I can get a little better each day as long as I'm working towards that. So I really, and she was saying, maybe having, and I told her, I was like, it's a little nerve-wracking having your sponsor on the podcast when I haven't done any work since the last time we went over step 2, and I celebrated 2 years clean. I haven't really done any work, if I'm honest. I mean, to an extent I have. I switched home groups to better my recovery. I've alleviated some of my responsibilities and some of my commitments in recovery so that I could transition into being of service down here and getting commitments, which kind of left me in a place where I have to make a decision. Where am I going to have commitments at? But I haven't been able to in the past 2 weeks because we don't have that in-person face-to-face contact. Like, I can't go to a subcommittee. As far as like group conscience, I went to group conscience when I joined my new home group, and didn't get a service commitment at the home group level yet. So anxious to see where I can be of service. And, in a sense of being of service, I guess this podcast is like being of service to an extent. But yeah, man, I find myself in a place right now where I'm really complacent, and I really needed this interaction with you to like kind of like propel my recovery. And so hopefully I can make that step in the right direction after today. So I'm asking you right now to hold me accountable. Like, I need to start at step 3, man, because I'm at this point right now where it's like, I want to hold on to my own will instead of turn it over, and making that decision each morning to move forward with my own will is kind of what I've been doing. And to an extent, I've been trying to pray more and ask God to help me turn it over to him, but I find myself moving throughout the day without doing that. So it's been quite an experience trying to learn and navigate in this process and grow when I don't have that. Like, we live almost an hour away from each other.
Yeah, 45 minutes probably. Yeah, about that. Yeah.
So it's a little bit more difficult now.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully this can be the catalyst to jump back in some step work and get more engaged in the process. I mean, I find myself in that place, with step work, it happens, I don't want to say frequently necessarily, but it's not uncommon that I get in a place where I haven't picked my step work up in a little bit, know? And sometimes I can just make the decision on my own. I make that realization that I haven't, and I make a decision. Hey, okay, well, today I'm going to write on a question, and then I'm going to try to do that tomorrow. Or sometimes if something comes up, a character defect rears its ugly head in a relationship or whatever is going on. I'm like, dude, I need to get back to my step work, and focusing on it. So yeah, I mean, because I shared with you earlier that I was reading this morning on step 3 and 2 of the books that we use in a program that we're in, and I really like some of the literature. I'm a big literature guy in the 12-step program. And what I was reading this morning had I'm into practical suggestions, right?
Yes.
It's a little bit too much, right? And it talks about in the third step some too. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, do you have an example? What do you mean by practical suggestions?
Like, I always just want somebody to tell me exactly what to do in any given situation. Just tell me what I got to do, you know? So with the third step in one of our books, like it talks about 3 different things that pretty much anybody can do that would be in line with the third step and making a decision to turn my will and my life over, right? So one of them is to continue to work on and develop a relationship with a higher power, right? That's something that I can do. Yes. Another thing is to work on not trying to control everything in my life and control all the outcomes and try to make things go the way that I want them to go.
Well, and that's what I was just going to say. You had me thinking, like, anytime I'm faced with making a decision, I have to, like, what I find myself doing is making that decision for myself. Like, nobody can tell me what decision to make. And so I don't reach out to other people that may have had similar experiences for suggestions.
Right.
I just end up making the decision for myself. But I also know that my decision-making process in the past has got me what has got me. It's got me picking up and using, making bad decisions, you know, so that's hard, man.
Like, and ultimately it is our decision, right? Like, I have to make my own decisions, but I can reach out to some other people, like you were saying, and get some experience to help me make that decision. That's another thing from the literature I like is there's one part where it talks about how none of us are capable of consistently making good decisions, you know? So like, I try to keep that in mind and know that even if I'm pretty sure I know what I want to do or what I think is in God's will for me to do or in line with God's will, I can still reach out to someone who might have experience just to kind of verify that or get a different angle on it, you know? And that's the whole thing with sponsorship is like, you know, we have a pamphlet about sponsorship in the program that we're in, and it talks about, you know, there's a little conversation in there and it says, oh, some guy talked to somebody else and said, well, why do I really need a sponsor? And the other guy says, well, it's hard to spot self-deception by yourself, you know, or on your own or whatever it is. So
super important to remember, and that's something I used to talk about a lot in my early recovery. You can't spot self-deception. That's why we need a sponsor. That's why we need to reach out and ask for help, even when we don't feel like it, when we think we have it under control. But the funny thing about all this is that the government is asking us to isolate right now, right? So it makes it harder to reach out. We don't have that face-to-face contact with people in our network or people in the rooms of recovery. It makes it easier to isolate and harder to reach out. So one of the things I had to do yesterday is I called Brady. Right after I talked to Brady, I called Ben, or Ben called me because I had been reaching out to Ben. So he called me back, and like I just took that 15 minutes to talk to these guys and connect with these men in my network to keep me accountable and keep me in that connection. You know, it's super important. And I encourage anybody else, like in this period of isolation that we're quarantining, to reach out. Reach out to me if you need to. Reach out to anybody. Just let them know where you're at today. Right.
We can still connect. We just have to do it in a little bit of a different way. And that can be uncomfortable and can be kind of awkward at times, but it's there. You know, I think about kind of like the guy that you were talking about on Reddit or whatever, people who are starting their recovery journey right now, right? Ooh. And I want to say I can't imagine doing that right now, but it's so possible, right? The tools are still there. You know, it can be more difficult at times. Again, we have to follow different avenues and do some different things, but we are still a recovery community, right? There are people that are staying clean. We're going to stay clean through this whole situation. We're going to get on the other side, whatever happens with it. And there will be people who will get clean at this time and will probably have such a strong foundation in recovery because of the things that they had to do to connect with the rest of the recovery community as a whole right now.
It's a very good point.
So it probably ends up being a blessing, you know, after the fact. And I've been talking to my sponsor and also his sponsor, my grand sponsor, about like, you know, everything with these online platforms, what kind of effect that's going to have for the recovery community after this is over, right? Because I know that I was not someone who I had done a couple online meetings before because I got plugged in with some guys that were over in the Netherlands, right? And we had online meetings because we could have done it on the phone, but we can't get together in person, you know? So it was out of that necessity of like geographical distance that we did it. And it was just a couple of times I wasn't real familiar with it. So the past couple of weeks of doing all these online meetings, it's been really different for me. And online meetings with people that are like sometimes right down the street from me, but we're keeping our distance because we don't want to gather in a large group, you know? So,
well, I think, like, if I were to project and try to make a prediction for what this is going to look like after we're allowed to go back to meetings, is like the home group Zoom meetings that are happening, they will stop,
Sure.
right? And we'll be able to meet back in person. But I think we're going to see other meetings pop up, like new online home groups that don't exist right now in person. Because what I think I see and I think that what I see right now is like the home groups that we used to be able to go to in person are making the Zoom meetings at the same time that they would meet in person on the same days of the week, same time, right?
Right.
I would be willing to bet that there's also new meetings pop up that didn't exist in person before. Mm-hmm. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that my grant sponsor helped start some noon meetings all through the week. And he was looking for some help with people to facilitate, or secretary of those meetings, chair the meetings, and that wasn't based off of any other meeting that was in existence necessarily. Correct. It was just he's working from home and he's got the time to do that and was looking for some help. He and I also started a Saturday morning 8:30 meeting. Okay. Now that's a time slot where in Westminster we have a meeting, but that group did not make the decision to create a Zoom meeting or an online meeting for it. So we just made one at the same time following the same format, but it's not that home group. We didn't call it that. Okay. So that's kind of an in-between. Who knows what will happen with that? That one will probably, I would think, go away as well, is that there would be one to attend in person. But yeah, these new ones that are popping up just, and I think that that's a great thing. I think it's just a tool, and I think, my take on it right now is just that it's going to add to our resources as a recovery community, so I'm all for it. That's
cool, man. And I know one of the meetings that didn't exist before was our sponsorship family meeting, which started last Friday at 8 p.m. Yeah. Now, I was telling you how I'm grateful for that because my home group now is on Friday nights at 8 p.m. However, my home group didn't start a Zoom meeting yet. So I was like super excited about this, sponsorship family meeting. But then it was funny the next day, my sponsorship, not my sponsorship family, but my home group decided to start a Zoom meeting. So I think next week is when they're going to start that. And I know the sponsorship family meeting is going to be 8 o'clock every Friday. So I'm looking forward to be able to do both. I just have to be a part of my home group still, but I also have to be a part of my home group family. So I think may find a schedule where I can rotate 1 week on, 1 week off. I'm not exactly sure yet. Yeah. So we'll see how long this thing lasts too, where we can't go to meetings in person.
Yeah, for sure. I like the whole sponsorship family thing. I think that exists across the board in some different 12-step fellowships. I know some people who don't like it, right? Because they feel like it's exclusionary. Like, if you're not sponsored by this person or they're not your sponsor, then you're not invited to whatever's going on. And I get that. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind if you're choosing, or like I choose to do sponsorship family type things. And that would just be my sponsor and his sponsor, and then the guys that I sponsor, and if they sponsor anyone. I just think it's a way to create some camaraderie and some connections and just amongst people who are sponsoring each other or sponsored by someone. But I put it out there. I'm not sure exactly how I did it, but with that meeting, if there's any addict, anyone who's having a hard time and is struggling and needs to get to a meeting at that time, give them the code to get into the meeting that we're doing. If they're not sponsored by one of us, I don't really care. They should come in. If they're a suffering addict and they need a meeting, then they should just come on into the meeting.
Yeah, it's open. It's like an open meeting.
Right. And I like that we were doing that because my grant sponsor had a sponsorship thing that was going on once a month, but sometimes it would be down in Anne Arundel County and people from up this way wouldn't go down there. People down there wouldn't come up here. So I'm hoping that we can utilize an online platform in the future just to get more participation from people, and we'll see. But that's just something that came to mind. I hope that those kind of things continue even after all this is done.
Sure, man. That sponsorship gathering was going to happen in Jessup, I believe.
I think it was,
I saw it was canceled last week, and then this Zoom meeting popped up. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I'm grateful for this time. However, it is such a life as we know it has been different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know how long it's going to last. We're living in a scary time. So I think it's more important than ever to have that connection and be able to use this. Like, no one has any excuses now to not make a meeting.
Absolutely.
And I reached out to one of my buddies yesterday. I was talking to him and I was like, have you done any Zoom meetings yet? He hasn't. And I encouraged to help him get in, like help him set it up. And
Yeah.
I encourage him to attend a meeting tonight. And he texted me right before the podcast and said he'll be there. Another person helped him set that up today. So
Good.
That's cool, man. You know, holding people accountable and during this time is gonna be something that helps us.
Yeah, yeah. And it's crazy right now. There's so much going on. We had to have a conversation about if and how we were going to do this today.
Yeah, we
know?
did.
And I just felt like, you know, and I try to, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, I try to be respectful for all the precautions that everybody's taking right now, you know, and the way that I look at, you know, I'm someone who's still working, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that I'm still employed and I'm able to make money. I know there are a lot of people that aren't right now, you know, and I work in a warehouse type environment. It's a distribution and operations center. And so we're still functional. We're considered an essential business. We distribute books is what we do there. So some of those are considered essential because some of them are books that people are using for school.
Yeah.
You know, we also play like a bigger role in the transportation supply chain of the country, in the sense that sometimes we ship books out to the West Coast. The trailer and the tractor trailer goes out there, and then they have to get back. So they're bringing produce back, or they're bringing food back. So
that's
if
awesome.
We would stop operating, that's going to affect, we're just one piece of that puzzle, but it's going to affect the whole thing. But we're still in business, and I hope we continue to be. But I have to take, we have super high social distancing policies at work right now, which I'm so grateful for. And, you know, but I'm I feel like I'm well versed at this point with my social distancing practices. I'm sure I can always improve and learn more. But when we talked about how we were going to do this, are we not going to do it at all? Are we going to do it remotely? Am I going to come over? What are we doing? You know, it's me and you sitting in here right now. You know, we're practicing social distancing. You know, we didn't hug when I saw you. You know, we would always hug when we would see each other. You know,
that's one of the things I brought up when you got here. I was like, should we hug or no?
Right.
And you mentioned, well, it's good practice that we just not. And
right. And sometimes I got to remember too, like, what kind of example am I setting for other people? And not just you or what, but just anybody else who's watching or who is, you know, hearing about what I'm doing. I'm not talking about with this, just in life in general, you know, like people watch a lot, other people, you know, and take a lead from that. So like, I remember that sometimes, but I feel like we're being safe, you know, which is, but I wanted to come, this is super important to me, you know, anything that has to do with recovery is super important to me. And I consider it to be essential, you know. Right now in the state of Maryland, like I mentioned earlier, we're still allowed to meet with 10 or less people, you know, and it might be very soon that that's not the case anymore. You know, there's some places in Pennsylvania just on Friday that they're on, I think what they're calling stay at home orders, where they're not supposed to be doing any traveling or gathering at all unless it's essential. And there's a list of those things that fall into that category, but that's even a step further than where Maryland is right now. Yeah. So I just felt like it was, you know, but I'm totally respectful. There are people who are essentially sheltering in place or isolating right now or quarantining who are not sick, who don't have to do that, but they're doing it because they feel like that's the right thing for them to do, you know. And I'm just trying to be respectful of everybody at this time, just like I would, you know, hope that people are of me and the decisions that I make, you know.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird time that we have to rethink, and we have to take precaution that everyday life before this happened, you wouldn't even had to think about it. Just give you a hug. Come on over. We're going to do the podcast. You know, these are things. I'm finding myself having to ask questions that I never thought I would have had to ask before. Yeah. But the one thing that I really like about you, Kris, is that you show up. Not just the fact that you showed up today for the podcast, but the reason I asked you to be my sponsor is because you don't just talk recovery, you walk recovery. You know, you show up to area level commitments. I see you at subcommittees and area service, and participating in starting a home group that you did, and putting together events at your home group, and like really doing what's suggested of people when they come into this process. And like, that's something I admire about you, because I don't want to follow suggestions from someone that's not practicing it themselves, you know? So like, that was important to me when I was trying to figure out who I was going to ask to sponsor me. Like how they find their role in this, in this process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I appreciate that. Thank you for telling me that. And I think that that's all a reflection of the way that I feel about recovery, you know, and just how grateful. I think that, you know, I really look at gratitude as like the fuel for what I have to do to stay clean and stay in the recovery process and work on myself and be active, you know. And I feel like I have this personal feeling that I owe my 12-step program my life, you know, and that I can work and be of service and do all these things for the rest of my life. And I'm still not going to be able to pay that back, but I'm going to try, you know. And that's contrary a little bit to, in the program, we say, you know, there are no dues or fees, and there absolutely aren't, right? But that's my personal feeling that I feel in my heart or in my soul that I just can't shake, is that this is the right thing for me to do, you know. So and so many people showed up for me when I was new. So many people showed up for me at different times in my recovery that were difficult, and it just feels like the right thing to do to continue to do that. So like, my 12-step program is my life, really. You know, I work, I have a full-time job that's very engaging. It keeps me very busy. I have my recovery, I have my relationships in my life, and like, that's pretty much it. And that's how I choose to live my life. And I try to be respectful, again, of how anybody else chooses to live their life, but I am very active and involved. And I hope that I can continue to do that, because I've gotten nothing but positives out of that and growth, you know? So
yeah, man, that's awesome. When you came into recovery, did you know that you were going to be here this long? Did you feel it in your heart? Was there anything that gave you like this sense of, within your first year? I don't know. Like, what was your experience? I mean, you have 7 years clean. That's awesome. I aspire to get where you are and to keep things moving past that, you know? Right. But this is really a 1 day at a time process. Did you get this? Did you get the 7 years by 1 day at a time, or did you just know, like, I'm going to be clean for the rest of my life? Like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, definitely a day at a time process. I mean, just for today, like, when I came in, like when I was in those H&I meetings, that treatment facility, like I said, I wasn't real. I was like, it gave me some hope, but I'm like, I don't know. This seems a little cheesy. This seems a little, I wasn't used to opening up to anybody. So I was very hesitant. I started going to the actual meetings, and it just grew on me over time, you know? And really what happened is, again, it's a gratitude. I started being appreciative of living clean. And when I first got clean, I had things to deal with, you know. I had financial stuff to deal with. I had broken relationships that I had to deal with. I had some of those things. But what I found was that as I stayed clean, even the first couple days, couple weeks, couple months, I wasn't creating more wreckage for myself. I wasn't creating more drama. I wasn't causing new problems, you know, and I made some mistakes, but I wasn't causing these huge problems for myself that I was when I was using. And I started, like, that really hit home with me, you know, and I was like, wow, maybe this is something that I could do long term. But I always keep in mind, just for today, you know, all I have is today. I got to focus on my recovery today, you know. But yeah, no, it wasn't like, oh yeah, now I'm here and I'm going to stay clean for the rest of my life. It was progressive, like a lot of other things for me. It grew on me over time. I was so excited when I celebrated my first year clean, you know. It was just the most awesome thing. And then I did experience some complacency right after that, though, because it was like, it felt like a finish line. It did, even though I knew it shouldn't. It still felt that way. And I had to re-engage myself with the program. Every year or so, 18 months, I feel like I kind of go through this little period of complacency where I have to get plugged into a new area of the program, talk to some new people, build some new relationships, whatever it is. And that's my responsibility. It's kind of like, you know, we talk about, like, I have the disease of addiction. It's not my fault or my responsibility that I have it, but because I have it, the responsibility is that I have to do something about it, right? Like, it's not acceptable for me to just be out in active addiction, I'm an addict, so that's just the way it is, you know? And it's the same kind of thing, like with anything else, is like, if I'm feeling complacent, it's then my responsibility to get myself plugged back in and not just kind of wallow in, oh, this is how I feel right now and that's how it's got to be, because it doesn't, you know? It's a choice.
Yeah, man, you just mentioned feelings. Like, I struggle a lot with that. I struggle a lot with new feelings, or I might get angry about something and then I just focus all my energy on that anger, and it builds on itself and it builds into this big monster where I find myself losing sleep or acting out in rage and like inappropriate ways. Like, how do you deal with feelings that are uncomfortable for you?
Yeah. I talk to people about them, you know, and I'm still very much in a process of learning about that, you know. How soon am I willing to talk about something when I'm feeling it? Because the longer I let it go, like I feel like I was just hearing you describe, the worse it gets, right? So like how soon am I willing to stop that process and open up to somebody about it, you know, and maybe do, and I feel like I've picked up a lot of tools also with the ability to do that better than I have in the past through working the 12 steps, you know, because I have formally worked through the 12 steps in the program that I'm in with a sponsor. And I'm now in the process of working back through the steps because I feel like it's just a never ending learning process, you know. It's the layers of the onion, you know, continually peeling back the layers of the onion and digging a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And I've picked up tools through that, but I feel like overall, it's just how soon am I willing to open up to someone to get more in the solution about how I'm feeling, you know, and that's up to me.
Yeah, man. Peeling back the layers of the onion, as they say, more will be revealed, right? And you said, how soon am I willing to open up? And it made me think, like, how soon am I willing to open up and change is how soon that I'm willing to open up that book and work on those steps. You know, the one question I wanted to ask you before this podcast, before you even came today, is like, in that experience of complacency after you finish a step, right? Have you had the experience ever of plowing right through and not taking a break? Like for me, I mentioned, like, I finished step 2, I celebrated 2 years clean, and I haven't done any work since, right? In the step working guide. Have you ever had the experience of, like, you finish a step and you just go right into the next one after you go over it with your sponsor?
Oh yeah. In my first year, I was so, like, once the program was growing on me and I just had so much willingness and enthusiasm after a while for the program, I was working step after step after step and just going through that, you know. That is not always the case though, you know, but that was really just finishing it, having the willingness, being excited, you know, and just going to the next thing. But that was really early on that I was that way, you know, just recently. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it sounds like, you know, because that was your experience early on, like you had more free time. You didn't have all this stuff going on in your life.
Yeah.
You were able to focus on that. I find for me, like, you know, my daughter just celebrated you know, her first birthday, and like I have her to look after, and I have all these other things that it's easy for me to make an excuse why not to pick up the step working guide. You know?
Sure. I was just talking to somebody the other day who was somebody that I sponsor, who was explaining to me that he's so busy right now that he doesn't have time to call me. You know, and I hear that from people sometimes. I'm so busy, I don't have time to do step work. I don't have time to whatever. You know, like I feel like in 99.9% of the cases, like I have 10 or 15, even if I'm super busy and I got stuff going on all day, I can find 10 or 15 minutes to pick up the phone and call my sponsor if I need to. I can find 10 or 15 minutes to sit down and write on one step working question, you know, so the time's always there. But the more busy I am, the more challenging it gets to be to find the willingness to take those 10 or 15 minutes and not take that time to sit on the couch and watch TV or scroll through Facebook mindlessly or do something else, you know? So I feel like the time is always there. It's just, am I going to really utilize it for that? But I mean, I just had that challenge recently. So I'm on the 5th step right now, but when I was in the 4th step, again, this is something, me doing something to try to stay away from complacency. And one of our pieces of literature, it talks about how we can write on the 4th step and write the whole thing out at once, or we can work on it a little bit each day. And I heard someone point out to me that it doesn't say take, you know, write on it once a week or whatever. It says either write it all at once or write on it a little bit each day. So I had some time off of work and I made a decision that I was going to make the attempt to write a 4th step all at one time. Okay. Right. In one day. And
it sounds overwhelming.
It does. Right. It was a challenge. And I told myself that I was not going to forego the searching and fearless aspect of doing that inventory. Like I was not going to do it in one day if it was going to take away my ability to be thorough. Right. And I was going to have to be honest with myself about that. So what happened is I wrote on it all in one day. I didn't finish. So I decided I would just write on it the next day. And I was able to write a 4th step in 2 days. Right. And I'm like, oh, I was pumped about that. I felt good. Moved on to the part in the 5th step I need to do before getting with my sponsor to go over the whole thing. And I've been dragging my feet on it, you know? So it's this ironic thing that I sat down, had the willingness to put all this work into a 4-step, and then I've been dragging my feet on the 5th step. And it's not out of fear of sitting down with my sponsor. I honestly don't have a problem with that. It's just procrastination, and then I'm not making it a priority, you know? So that's crazy. I'll put in so much work here, and then right after that, just like, not, you know, it's insanity. So
it's, you have to make that decision. It's like it's easier to be complacent than it is to put the footwork in, just like it is easier to do, because our brains are trained, you know, being an active addiction. It's so easier to do the next wrong thing than it is to do the next right thing. And that's why it's important to be able to have that filter before, where we can think before we react, or think before we say something that we're going to regret saying to somebody. These are things that I have to consciously, I'm just talking about myself. I have to consciously take the time to think about what I'm doing. And, you know, a person like me that already overanalyzes everything, you know, you would think that it would be an easy thing to do, but it's not. You know, I want to react and just get things out of the way, or, you know, but it's important to me that I take the time in this process. But then I say that out loud, and I say I need to take my time and really allow the steps to work in my life. And then I use that to like not pick up the step work, because I'm still allowing step 2 to work in my life, you know? But I think that we practice all the steps before we even get to write on them. What's your thought process with that?
Sure, I can see that. Principles, right? Because, I mean, to me, the steps and part of the process of the step work is to get to the spiritual principles that are underlying each of the steps. And there's not necessarily just one specific one for each step, but I think that there are a certain number of spiritual principles in each one. And we can definitely either intentionally or unintentionally utilize those principles before we've formally gotten to a point of working whatever step it is. Like 100, definitely. That's why, you know, we have step meetings, and we don't say, if you haven't worked this step, then don't attend the meeting. Right? Because it's important to learn about it and know what's going on with it. There's certain aspects that I suggest that people stay away from without formally doing with a sponsor, like a 9th step, the amends process, the formal amends process. You know, that's really important to have a sponsor and someone to guide me on what's appropriate to do and not to do. That doesn't mean that I can't say sorry to someone when I do something wrong, but you know, maybe something that was from my past or whatever the situation was. But yeah, I mean, it's all very important. And spiritual principles are spiritual principles. You know, we don't have a monopoly on that in 12-step recovery. I mean, you know, that's just a world thing. You know, it's a human thing.
You brought up a very valid point of how, like, don't try to work the steps on your own when you were talking about the 9th step in particular. But I think the whole process should not be undergone without the guidance from a sponsor. Really, what I've heard is the sponsors, having a sponsor, their only real job is to guide you through the 12 steps, right? And so you mentioned, because as far as what I know about the 9th step without having formally worked it, so forgive me if I misinterpret, but we don't want to make amends where it would injure ourselves or others, right?
Right.
So for example, if I were just to think of an example, is like if I robbed a drug dealer back in my active addiction, I don't want to go and pay back that drug dealer because I may be putting myself in harm's way.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, and the wording on it is harming them or others. So the person that I would be going and making the amends to, if it's going to harm them, then I shouldn't do it, or if it's going to harm somebody else. So if in the process of me going and making this amends, I got to drag somebody else into the situation that maybe isn't willing, then I need to stay away from that.
That's a good point.
And then a lot of people, and I'm of this mind, is that when we say others, the others includes me, the person who is making the amends. I've heard it a little bit different way, but again, that comes down to who your sponsor is and kind of, you know, what the situation is. But yeah, absolutely. It's super important. So I do this thing at meetings where, like, if I'm at a meeting and someone, particularly if it's my home group, but if I see someone purchasing or buying the step guide that we use in our program, if it's somebody pretty new, I'll usually go up to them and just start up a conversation with them or whatever, and ask them if they have a sponsor, you know, because there's a lot of people that are like, oh, well, I just want to get the book. And I'm not going to tell them not to get the book, but I try to emphasize, especially with someone new, how important it is to have a sponsor to guide me through the process. Because again, 9-step, there were amends that I thought were appropriate for me to make that my sponsor explained to me why it was inappropriate. And then it made sense to me afterwards. But if I didn't have that other person there to talk to me about that, I could have went and created a bigger mess than what I was already dealing with just because I didn't have experience with doing it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this is really a give and take program. I mean, like, we got to give it away to keep it, as they say in the cliche, you know. And I remember when I first came around, and the whole reason I brought this up is because you mentioned about someone buying a step working guide. Well, someone bought me, you know, the Just for Today daily meditation book when I first came around. And I remember having that book for years, right? And then I started getting those Just for Today emails on my phone every day. And then I was afforded the opportunity to give this book to someone who I think was in a recovery house at the time. Yeah, he was actually. He was in a recovery house and may not have had his phone to be able to get the access to those emails with the Just for Today daily meditation. So I gave it away to him, and like that felt good that I was able to give away something that was freely given to me.
That's awesome. I had a similar experience to that. So when I first came around, there was a guy who really took me under his wing. He wasn't my sponsor, but he was someone that I met at my first meeting. He just hooked me up with a bunch of different people, with a network, with all the suggestions in the program. He gave me a Just for Today book, and it was like stained, like it had some kind of stain. It was something, I don't know, but it was
stains,
it was pretty beat up.
Holes.
But like but it meant so much to me because he gave it to me, you know, and I didn't really have money at that time to be, you know, doing that necessarily. So he gave it to me, and then I got to have the experience of later on when I was in a position to do so, to give that to someone else who could really benefit from it. You know, so similar experience, and how good that felt to supply something with somebody with something that they needed or that was going to be really helpful to them. So absolutely.
Yeah, man. Well, I want to start wrapping things up, but if what I would like to, you know, ask you is like, if you were to tell the newcomer anything, what would you say to them right now?
Just keep coming back.
Yeah.
And that's that cliche. We say it all the time in the meetings, but I mean, it's just so true, because if I just keep coming back, no matter if I've relapsed or whatever's going on in my life, I'm giving myself another opportunity to maybe something sits differently with me. Maybe I get some different information. If I just keep coming, whether or not I used or I'm high or whatever it is, just keep coming back. You're giving yourself an opportunity to get clean and stay clean.
Yeah, you know? Man.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because like I said at the end of every podcast, the message is that an addict, any addict, regardless of your drug of choice,
right?
It doesn't even have to be mind-altering drug. It can be sex, it can be food, it can be gambling.
Sure.
The message is that any addict can stop using, lose the desire to use, and find a new way to live. And that's really what it's all about, man. Got to give it away to keep it. So I thank you for coming out, Kris, and doing this podcast with me. I'm excited for what the future has to hold in our relationship and just this journey of recovery, man. It's a blessing to be sitting here today, alive, you know, clean and with a new perspective and new opportunity and new day to do the next right thing and maybe help the next person in this process, or maybe not even in this process. Maybe someone who's not in this process just needs a helping hand also. And I'm able to show up and do that today. So
for sure.
As long as the state of Maryland allows us to have that interaction.
We'll see. So, we'll see how long.
Yeah. I just want to, you know, send out prayers to those families that may have someone who fell to the disease of addiction or to this virus that's going around, man. People are out there dying, and I think we just need to take a moment to be grateful that we're sitting here today, healthy, clean, and still have the opportunity to work. So you can find gratitude in a lot of things. So grateful to have you out here today, man. Thanks again for tuning in, and